Hey, welcome everybody. This is John Paul Mendocha, Dr. Speed Selling. This is the Raging Verbalist number 37. Let me just explain that the Raging Verbalist is here every Friday. Fingers crossed, Murphy isn't listening. And talk about a variety of business topics, things that I see, primarily aimed at business. But today is a very special session, personal to me, and hopefully it's a story that will help and help you. So here it is. August 6th, which was yesterday, was a very unique day in history. For those of you who don't know, yesterday was the 75th anniversary of the dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. If you've not read Chris Wallace's book 1945, it's a good history read. It's not in depth, but it is covers things in a chronological order of what happened that year and how that the world changed on August the 6th. So I'm sharing that part of it because that's important, but that really isn't what this is about. In some ways it is, because it's interesting how someone's life gets inexorably tied to history. And do we really notice it? Do we really grasp onto what happens and how we ebb and flow, and we're there. And this is really about my father. My father was, in fact, on a ship, the USS Minneapolis, which is a heavy cruiser in the Pacific, having gone through 11 major battles in his time on that ship. And he joined that ship in 1943, all the way through the end of the war. And the uniqueness of any day that could have happened is that in 1945, in August, as the U.S. and Allied forces were preparing for their attack on the mainland of Japan to end World War II, the war in Europe had already ended in April, and now there was this big emphasis on what to do with Japanese and what would take place there. And there was a lot of fighting going on in the Pacific. He saw a lot of action in the Pacific. And what made that uniqueness is that his birthday sadly he's gone, but it was August the 6th. So August the 6th, 1945, on this heavy cruiser in this battle group, he turned 21. Now, the reason why I thought this was important and significant is the fact that I wouldn't be here had he not survived the war. Now, a lot of people say, well, John, is that melodramatic? Well, I mean, he wasn't in some remote lines or something. He had fought in many different battles, and someday maybe I'll recount those. But the importance of it is to imagine that every society has a time when a young man becomes, or young boy, if you will, that transition becomes a quote unquote fully an adult and a man in this world. And I know when I turned 21, it was a big deal. Now, I kind of jumped the fences a little bit with going to Vegas when I was 17. But he turned 21 sitting on this ship in the Pacific on August the 6th. It wasn't until a few days later that they found out that the bomb had been dropped. And in fact, a lot of people think that after the bomb dropped on August 6th, that the war wasn't over, and everybody just kind of said, okay, we're done. But it really wasn't until August 15th when the Emperor Hirohito accepted the surrender to the Allied forces. Now, the interesting part about the Minneapolis, which is CA-36 for those who are really Navy buffs, is that the Minneapolis was one of these ships that was in lots of action. And in fact, prior to him ever getting on the Minneapolis, it had suffered a severe attack. 2 torpedoes blew off the front of the bow. They closed off the waterproof compartments and went to an island and built a wooden facade on the front, made it back to Pearl. I think they went to eventually to Mare Island, I think is where they redid it. I have to check it even further. But the importance is that when he shows up in 1943, By this point in time, any vision or thought that this war was going to be over quickly and easily, and that the right side or the Allied side was going to win over the fascists, the Axis powers, would be taken care of in just a few weeks. For those of you who are not aware, when Pearl Harbor was attacked in 1941, many people thought the war would be over in 6 weeks. Turned out not to be true. So as he went through all these battles and he lived through all of this action, the question kept hitting him, and he would share these stories, and in fact later in life would be very remorseful and feel, again, for all of the things that he saw. And today we would call it PTSD, which I know he suffered from, but it wasn't diagnosed and they didn't have anything for it, because when he was on that ship, he was on an anti-aircraft battery. And in fact, he was the guy who was wearing the radio and stopping the crew from firing too soon. And he would tell this story about how his back would be to the horizon and he would be facing those who are ready to fire. Now, I cannot imagine the amount of adrenaline pumping through those sailors as they're at battle stations, ready to do battle with incoming planes and stop them from, hitting the ship. And he tells, the story goes is that the kamikazes, which were the suicide planes, had become a strategy of the Japanese, in which you didn't have to worry about the bomb hitting you. You had to worry about the plane as the missile, the plane as the attack mechanism. Anybody who's seen the footage of 9/11 understands that that was used again in a very significant way in the Twin Towers. So he talked about how he was sitting there and he would have the radio headset on, and control would say, give a range and distance and the number of planes coming in, and the fact that the crew was to hold fire and not fire at targets that they could not possibly hit, could not even get close to. And all they needed to do was to hold and wait and hold and wait. And I have often wondered what that experience was like. What would that feeling be? What's going through your head? What's flashing through your head? Because in his case, the planes are behind him. The planes are coming in, and all he has on the radio is a voice in a very monotone, measured way saying, hold your fire, not in range. Hold your fire, not in range. And as that repeated, and as the planes came into view, as those who were going to be firing the anti-aircraft guns kept getting more and more excited and kept looking out there thinking, wait a second, I can see them. I need to start firing. There's that survival mechanism that kicks in. And of course, his job was simply to tell them, not in range, we're holding. They'll give us the order. They know what they're doing. And the amount of trust that they had to have all the way up through the process to make that connection. And then, after what seemed like an indeterminate amount of time, and tears in his eyes, he would say to me, and they finally said, targets are in range, open fire. In which he would then give the signal and the anti-aircraft battery would go off. Now, he was a small cog in a big machine, but he was in the middle of action, and they would start to fire. On one occasion, as the suicide planes, the kamikazes, had become more and more prevalent, the plane was coming at them. They were firing at will, which is the signal, fire at will, which means they could just keep shooting. And as they were firing and the turret was moving, he looked up because this suicide plane was so close. And he described how he made eye contact. And if you've ever done that across a room, across an airport, you're standing there, you're looking, and then just for some reason, bang, your eyes lock in and you make eye contact from distance. As he made eye contact with the pilot as the pilot flew over his head. All of the sailors that were in that turret were just swearing and so pissed off that they had missed the target. And of course, in some ways, he said in his own inimitable fashion, the best thing that could have ever happened is that we didn't make contact. Because had we hit that suicide plane, it would have exploded with its napalm and rained fire on all of us. And what it did was it flew over the ship and missed it. And in fact, crashed into the Pacific Ocean, having missed its target, which was this massive heavy cruiser. Many close encounters like that were what he experienced during the war. In fact, during the war, he went blind for 3 days and didn't know if he would ever see again. And amazingly, his sight reappeared. Now, the reason why I tell this story is that every single one of you has some connection to the past and what that past is. And when I meet people who do not understand their own history, their own circumstance, their own situation, and get a sense of where they were and how they're connected to this world, that connectiveness, I believe, is very important as you make your journey through life and what you're going to do. If you learn how to capture those and find those and retell those stories and make sure that that lives and survives beyond you. So he never had a chance to tell this story, if you will, to a larger, bigger audience like I have. He never really had a chance to have that voice, but I do. The realization that on a very specific date, 75 years ago, we can all be transported to that ship in the Pacific where my father turned 21 with his friends and mates were sitting there. Again, nothing to celebrate in a way. I mean, it isn't like a cruise line. There wasn't any place they're going to go. And more importantly, to wonder at that point in time, would they be in the battle or the battles to, in fact, get to the mainland of Japan? He told a very sad story, one that almost was unbelievable. And in fact, makes it so challenging is that he watched in the battle of Saipan, women who would stand on the edge of the cliff and would hurl their babies off of the cliff for fear that they would be captured by Americans, the Allies. And after sending their children to their deaths, follow them. That can't not affect somebody for the rest of their life. And yet he ended up raising my sister, my brother, and myself. He came back from the war, had trouble with this in his entire life, but still made it through. And in fact, if on that fateful day, 75 years ago, he turned 21, and the president, Harry S. Truman, had made a decision, maybe one of the most difficult decisions in all of history, which is to drop the atomic bomb in an attempt to shorten and end the war. To me, the most interesting aspect is that it took not one but 2 bombs to accomplish that task. Now, one will be able to argue from now until the end of our existence as a species on this planet whether that was the right decision or not. What I do know is that it did shorten the war, it did stop it. And without that, I don't know if I would be sitting here today talking to you and sharing this story. So on this day, actually one day passed, I just want to say that this would have been his 96th birthday. I miss him. I wish he was here to see what I've accomplished and what my brother, my sister, what we've all accomplished, but more importantly, to see this world and how it has changed. So happy birthday, Dad. This is the Raging Verbalist, number 37, and hopefully you've enjoyed this story and will get the courage to find one of these stories in your own life, record it for posterity, because we all need to have that touch and to understand that history isn't in a dusty old book. History is what we live every day. Live the best life that you possibly can and pass it forward. Thank you.